Dober dan in lep pozdrav vsem, ki ste se udeležili našega vabila na predavanje Kapučinski. Kot smo vam v vabilu napovedali, bo dogodek potekal v angleškem jeziku zaradi naših gostov, tako da bom tudi jaz zdaj začela oziroma spremenila jezik v angleščino. Warm welcome to everybody attending this Kapučinski lecture, development lecture, which is held at the Faculty of Social Sciences for the 4th time. I guess UNDP has trust in us that we are capable organizers of these lectures, so they offered us an opportunity to host again Kapučinski Development Lecture, and we are honored that this time we are able to greet among our audience here Dr. Seema Samar from Afghanistan, who you will meet shortly. She is the guest speaker today, and I must say that for me it is a privilege to have such a distinguished person in our midst, and I hope you will all share my opinion once you hear her speak. At the beginning, let me just say a few words about the Kapučinski lectures to those who may be attending this for the first time. Ever since new member countries have joined, now we are no longer new members because we already have passed 10 years, so I guess we are now newer, maybe, members. We have also become participants in international development cooperation. To promote the idea of international development cooperation among people in these countries, it was suggested to start with so-called Kapučinski development lectures. Kapučinski, in honor of the Polish journalist who was writing quite a bit about Third World. Development lectures, so as to share with people in first new member states, now all European member states, more information about the current issues on development cooperation, development problems. We have been quite privileged to be able to host these lectures from the very beginning. And as I mentioned already, this is the 4th lecture that we are having here. The lectures are sponsored by European Commission. So they are also this year, I would say, rather special, because this year is an International Development Cooperation Year, which the EU has declared as such. Within this, you have been able to see some of the videos which were prepared by the Slovenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specifically for European Year for Development. Without any further ado, I would like to now call on Natasha Goršek-Mencin, Head of Representation of the European Commission in Slovenia, to address this conference. Oops. Oops.
Najlepša hvala, Professor Bučar. Thank you very much, Maya. Dear Mrs. Samar, Excellencies, dear guests, it is a great honor that I'm addressing you today on behalf of the European Commission at this 4th edition of the Kapučinski Lectures at the University of Ljubljana. 2015 is actually a crucial year for development. It's a kind of a milestone on the international agenda. This year, the Millennium Development Goals reached their 2015 deadline. They were designated to eradicate poverty, and all 189 United Nations member states have committed to them. Also, the European Union committed to meet the goals. So 2015 is the year when we look at what we have achieved over the past 15 years and draw, of course, the lessons learned. It is also the year that the negotiations for what will replace the Millennium Development Goals, what will be, so what we call so-called post-2015 framework. And it is also the year when we hope to have a binding agreement to fight climate change, so-called conference, the climate conference in Paris, which is to take place this December. Let me now say a few words on what the Pro-Dean already mentioned about the European Year of Development. So as I was talking about 2015, of course it is only right that 2015 should have been dedicated to a European Year for Development. But what is actually the European Year, and what makes the European Year for Development so special? The European years have been organized now for the 30 years with the aim to raise the awareness, encourage the debate, reach out all European Union citizens and inform them on the results of the European Union policies. So this year will be actually the first one which will deal with the external actions of the European Union. This year's European Year for Development so puts in the spotlight the role of European Union as a global actor, in particular in international cooperation and development policy. Maybe you are aware that the EU as a global actor is one of the 10 priority points for the European Commission for this term, so from 2014 on. So maybe just a number of interesting statistics of us Europeans. So more than 8 out of 10 Europeans believe that development aid is important. 2/3 of the Europeans, we think that tackling poverty in development countries should be one of the European Union main priorities. However, more than half of Europeans say that they know practically nothing about where EU aid, humanitarian aid or development aid goes. So within the European Year for Development, we would like to encourage and engage the European Union citizens to make the slogan of the year, our world, our dignity, our future, real. So not just to leave it as a slogan. So it should become like a real conviction that we all have a stake in the future of this, of course, increasingly interdependent world. We also rely on our numerous partnership with civil society and international organizations, of course, the academia, to make the year a joint project and fantastic opportunity to work together in new ways which are needed. Mrs. Butcher already talked about the Kapuscinski lectures, but let me say that this is actually the joint initiative of the European Commission, United Nations Development Programme and Partner University. And as said, the aim is raising awareness, triggering the debates and on development through a series of high-level academic lectures. Today, to this date, over 60 Kapuscinski development lectures have been organized, so until today, since 2009, and gathered over 20,000 participants across the European Union, but also all over the world through the live web streaming. And as a communication platform for the European Year of Development, the Kapuscinski lectures are organized in each of 28 member states, starting from October last year and will end at the end of 2015. So as I said, the Kapuscinski lectures are live web streamed, so as well this lecture today is live web streamed. So I encourage you maybe to cover it through your Twitter account, so maybe to follow it. The hashtag is hashtag CAPT lectures, CAPT talks. So you can do it also you can enter, also in the viral world. So Dr. Samar, I look very much forward to your lecture, and I'm ensuring I hope that it will raise a lot of debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natasha. May I invite now also Jan Szynski, ODA Communication Specialist from UNDP, to address the lecture. Jan?
Thank you very much, and thank you primarily for coming. I know we're competing with beautiful weather, so the more we're grateful that you came, and I think, I mean, definitely you'll not regret. It's great to be again here together with the European Commission and us UNDP at the University of Ljubljana. Indeed, we started this cooperation in 2009 on these Kapuscinski lectures, and I think that this one is as well somehow special as well because because of the European Year for Development, but also because we a bit go beyond some infrastructural topics, hard investments, and this kind of issues, and we go into human rights theme, which is I think equally important, as I hope we'll hear today, for democratization and development, not only I guess in Afghanistan but worldwide. So I'd like to thank very much the European Commission for partnering with us on the series and this special lecture, the University of Ljubljana and definitely Dr. Samar for accepting this invitation. As said before, I'm also encouraging you to, and people sitting here but also watching it live, to put your questions on Twitter comments using the hashtag CapTalks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, for your kind words, and thank you for making this event possible, both to the Commission and to the UNDP. Now, of course, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Sima Samar, to take the floor and address the audience. I think we are extremely privileged to have you among ourselves. We have included some of your CV in the pamphlet that you have, but I think this doesn't give you the full justice. I think the speech itself will prove who we have in our midst, but let me just say that, as it says here in the pamphlet, you have devoted your life to and work to improving education, health, equality for women and girls, not only in Afghanistan, but I would believe in many other places as well. So, Dr. Samar, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Excellencies, professors, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today. I will speak mainly about my experience as an Afghan woman on the challenges in women's rights and gender equality in Afghanistan, and share with you the gains and achievement on human rights and women's rights in the last 13 years. I'm here to seek partnership with you and to find out what we Afghans and you, the youth and women, can do together to build on the gains and make Afghanistan a better and safer place for people, and particularly for the women, to live in freedom, with freedom and dignity, which would support the safety of all of us, and particularly in this planet. I'm here to speak with you, not only as a chairperson of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, but also as a person who have gone through and lived through all the stages of human rights atrocities, conflict, and systematic discrimination against women. I have personally gone through different kind of discrimination due to my ethnicity, my sex, my religion, and my belief in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was and still is an underdeveloped country and has always been very conservative and patriarchal society. Women in our country are counted as a second-class citizen and a property of the family. I, as a girl child, tried all the time to work harder to prove that I am able to work equally and even better than a male member of my family and male student in my school and university. In my professional life, I worked harder as a medical doctor in very remote part of the country, feeling the pain of my fellow women in Afghanistan. I will not talk about my work at Shohada organization that I established or the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, where I have been working for the past years in detail. But you can look them at the website of the Human Rights Commission. It's www.aihrc@aihrc.org.af. Women in Afghanistan saw the killing of their loved ones, the destruction and looting of their properties, sometimes the rape of their daughters, and different level of violence during the war. But we survived. The people generally suffered during the 36 years of war and conflict. But like in every war, the primary victims are women and children, particularly the sexual violence that happened in the past, and we are also witnessing it today, as it is unfortunately going on without much accountability and justice. I'll try my best to present to you what I consider important detail of the lessons we have learned and experienced in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to portray a picture of Afghanistan today in contrast with 13 years ago under the Taliban government. Under the Taliban, Afghan women were subjected to systematic discrimination, brutal and inhuman treatment by the government. Women were not allowed to go out and work, get an education, or simply walk on the street unless they were accompanied with mahram, with a close male relative. The discrimination was as such that women were not treated as human beings. They made Afghanistan a huge jail, imprisoning both men and women, but the treatment of women were much harsher. In contrast, now Afghan women are striving toward a better, brighter future. They are able to attend school, get higher education, work and hold offices. They have leading position in the media in different industries. They are working as a politician, artists, singers, and represent people in the provincial and national elected bodies. They also serve as a cabinet ministers, diplomats, civil society, and NGO leaders. You know that we just had approval of 4 women to be member of the cabinet. Ministry of Women's Affairs, Ministry of Counter-Narcotics, Ministry of Social Affairs, and Ministry of Higher Education. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights, for the first time in our history, guarantees equality between men and women. It's obligated the state to respect, promote, and protect human rights, and to work for improvement of the situation of women and families. Afghanistan has ratified and implemented CEDAW without any reservation. We ratified CEDAW in 2003 without any reservation. You could see in most of the countries who ratified CEDAW, they put some reservation, particularly in Muslim countries, they put reservation in different articles of CEDAW. And we ratified it without any reservation, but it doesn't mean that we implement all of them. And our EVO law criminalized act of violence against women in the country. In the country reports submitted to CEDAW in Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights in UPR committees, it has reiterated its effort towards the promotion and protection of women. These are huge changes, complemented by the changes that have been brought slowly to the country in policy formation, program implementation in the social, political, and cultural arenas. One cannot overlook that due to the presence of the international community, including your country, deep interest of the donor countries, and the sacrifice of the Afghan people in the international community, all the above-mentioned improvements have been made. However, the majority of the improvement has happened in Kabul, Afghan women who live in other major cities, and most of the women who live in rural areas have benefited little from the intervention and improvement. To make these improvements a reality for the daily life for women in the rural area, it requires a strong political will and joint efforts by all the stakeholders. Last year, Afghanistan has gone through transition which have direct and indirect impact on women's rights and gender equality. First, security transition. Afghanistan, from the international forces to the Afghan National Security Forces. From the transition process to be successful, it requires balanced approach toward military and civilian aspect. Unfortunately, we focus more on military part of it. At the moment, the main focus is on the transition to security forces, which is indeed very important and vital for the country. The Afghan security forces completely took over the security responsibility in the country. But as we all know, the Afghan National Security Forces still need the training, mentoring, and equipment by the international security forces. However, focusing only on the Afghan security forces will overshadow not only on the concern about the good governance and government capacity to deliver the basic social services to the population, but also in building confidence between the Afghan people and the state and institution. Unfortunately, women's role was invisible, which is not a very positive act by stakeholders during the security transition. Political transition. The recent history of Afghanistan reflects aggressive power struggle and violent transfer of authority. The political scheme of the country also shows various types of government, regimes ranging from monarchy to republican to communism, Islamic Republic of Mujahideen, and the harsh authoritarian Islamic Emirates of Taliban. There's a big difference. The ISIS saying is Islamic State, but our Taliban is Islamic Emirates. But the action is almost same. As a matter of fact, the Afghan people, particularly Afghan women, had no roles in electing their leaders and shaping their governments. They saw imposed governments selected for them, but not necessarily elected by them. Thus, the mutual relationship between citizens and their government as a necessity for good governance has not effectively been established. This missing component has been somehow fulfilled in the last few years after the fall of the Taliban regime. The presidential election in 2014 is a constitutional political order. The people's participation in the democratic and electoral process, with particular emphasis over the active participation of Afghan women, was a success story, particularly in the first round. The successful convening of the election in the first round was a severe blow to the Taliban and the other spoiler. Although the Afghan voters are well aware of the flaw during the previous election, they still see election as a reliable means of peaceful political transfer and determining political power. That is why the people in Afghanistan took the risk and participated in the second round of election. Despite all the threat and insecurity, unfortunately, the personal ambitions and lack of political commitment to democracy of some of the candidates prolonged the process, and finally the two candidates were agreed on unity government. Still, for the first time in our history, the transition of power happened in peaceful way. The government should have maintained its neutrality and impartiality in all phases of the electoral process and providing equal opportunity to all contestants, and national observers were critically important in the safeguarding the value for promotion of democratic process in Afghanistan. A good ground in provision of reliable security environment for election played a vital role, particularly for the participation of women in the election process. Economic transition. Economic transition is another transition that Afghanistan is going through. The withdrawal of NATO forces, the closure of provincial reconstruction team, and the reduction of the donation on development fund to the country equally requires a proper preparedness and strategy to reduce the negative impact on the people's life, especially women who are more vulnerable in this regard. Again, unfortunately, the political situation currently put a lot of economical pressure on the people's daily life. Unfortunately, some people in Afghanistan still depend on the humanitarian services in the country. The reduction on the funding by donor community might have a severe impact on the people's daily life. If this problem is not administered properly, it could cause some security problem in Afghanistan, as we know that the reduction on the humanitarian services has direct impact on women everywhere, in particular in conflict countries like Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, the AIHRC, the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, has always been supporting principled and value-based efforts for a negotiation and political settlement for ongoing conflict in the country. The Afghan people, and women in particular, are too tired of continued insecurity and fighting and are keen to support genuine peace effort. However, in order to have distinction between an honest political settlement and political compromises, the following factors should be taken into consideration. The Afghan government should develop and share the transparent strategy for reconciliation and reintegration, which indeed require due attention and political will to good governance. Fighting corruption, access to justice, accountability, and responsive government to the basic needs of the people. 2, united approach by the stakeholders in the country, regional and international, is critical in bringing peace in the country. The Afghan government should own the war and maintain the military pressure to bring the opposition to the table. Most importantly, the definition of the enemy should be agreed on. We unfortunately have not agreed on the definition of enemy yet, but we are talking about the peace talks. The current stance of Afghan government is more on mercy and forgiveness, while the other two components of confess and repentance necessary to any reconciliation and reintegration process are missing. The most important part is the acknowledgement of the suffering of the people is missing in the peace process. Both the Afghan government and international community to fill that missing part of the peace process. The inclusion of women as half of the population and victims of the violence is must in the peace process. Without strong presence of women, this game will not be completed. Human rights, women's rights, justice, and accountability should not undermined by short-term political gains, as the history showed that without strong support and involvement of public in the process, it will not be a sustainable peace. We had, during this 36 years of war, we had different agreement between the different groups. Even they went to Mecca and signed an agreement, but it did not bring peace in Afghanistan. A patriotical and conservative and war-torn society like Afghanistan would need a long-term, multi-dimensional strategy to change the mentality of the people with a deep-rooted tradition and culture. In this regard, I will go to different challenges that we face in gender equality and women's rights in our country and what can be done. First, education. Women's education has faced significant obstacles in Afghanistan, yet there have been enormous gains since 2002. In the early years after the fall of the Taliban, education has been a top priority for the government and donors. Much of donors' focus was on getting children back into school, with particular emphasis on primary level. The Back to School campaign, launched in 2002, significantly expanded enrollment for girls. The increase has been even more dramatic. Official enrollment figures have increased from an estimated 25,000 under the Taliban to more than 3 million girls currently enrolled. However, there still remains various challenges which need to be tackled to provide women with education facilities in rural areas, millions of girls are missing access to education due to the lack of school, security barriers, and lack of female teachers, and of course, the facilities. A patriarchal society would need to change by force of education, not only with primary education, but also higher education. Higher education is key, a ticket out of poverty and free from violence. It is an empowerment tool toward a better world or life. Violence against women and access to justice. Women in Afghanistan continues to suffer widespread discrimination, abuses, and domestic violence. Violence against women is a widespread phenomenon in the Afghan society, which is widely accepted as well. Forced and child marriages constitute 60% of all marriages, and it's quite high. An estimated 80% of Afghan women are affected by domestic violence, and half of all girls are married before the age of 16. The cause of these problems are rooted in the country's custom and tradition, weakness of the rule of law, and lack of knowledge and awareness about their rights of women guaranteed by national and international laws and conventions. Although report shows that there is 28% increase in the number of violence cases being registered on 2014, only 18% of these cases were addressed by justice mechanism. Frequent unjust treatment of victims deter people from reporting cases of violence against women, and culture of impunity benefited by perpetrator. In addition, a shortage of female judges, prosecutors discourage women from reporting the incidents. The data shows that women constitute 8.4% of judges, 6% of prosecutors, and 19.3% of defense lawyers are registered with Afghanistan Bar Association. But these are all located in the main cities or the big cities, not in the rural and district level. My organization has found that in over 86 districts of 18 provinces, courts are not functioning. In the district of more than 21 provinces, there are no defense lawyers. We also found out that there is no detention center for women who are accused of crimes. They often are kept in places where they are further at risk of rape and sexual harassment. They're given to some people to keep on their houses. So it is, they're very vulnerable to be victimized again. Access to justice as a basic human rights and clear indicator for the rule of law and development. Injustice in one part of the country is injustice to all the country and to humanity. Healthcare problem affecting women's rights. Access to health facilities are to some extent improved for women living in the major cities, in particular in Kabul. However, the situation remains difficult in the rural areas and remote districts of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has an estimated maternal mortality rate of 1,600 deaths per 100,000 live births, one of the highest in the world. According to the Ministry of Public Health, there are some improvement and changes. These figures are reduced now most probably to 50%. Although the Ministry of Public Health claims more reduction on mother and child mortality, but I think that the problem still exists. Again, rights to health and access to basic health services is very crucial for a society to be healthy, and particular to vulnerable group of societies such as women, children, the people with disability, and the elderly. Frequent pregnancy often prevent Afghan women from pursuing in education or from taking part in economic activities. One of the main problems in the lack of female health workers, particularly in the remote district, the lack of knowledge on reproductive rights does not enable the women to choose the number of their children that they would like to have. Most of the women in the rural area in their entire reproductive age are either pregnant or breastfeeding their children. This clearly violates their rights to choice. We have not done enough on women's access to contraception, which also help the reduction of poverty. This can be a great obstacle forward towards the improvement of women's rights in Afghanistan. Economic condition. The majority of Afghan women do not have income-raising opportunities. Their main activities are unpaid agricultural labor, livestock management, and family caregiving. Due to severe poverty in the rural area, most families are now open to allowing female family members to undertake economic activities outside the home, and as long as these activities are provided through honest and trustworthy supervised services. However, apart from limited short-term projects offered by some NGOs, there are no such opportunities available. Economical dependency of women do not give them a freedom of choice and freedom of action. So there is strong need for skill training for women and job opportunity to make them independent economically from the male member of the family. The economical empowerment of women is vital for the promotion of gender equality and improvement of women's rights. Women's public participation. There are numerous challenges to women's presence in the public life. Cultural barriers, insecurity, and safety concern comes first. While some report talks about decrease of security problem compared to the past years, several reported and unreported incidents happened to the female police officers and NGO workers who were killed in the last years. You heard the very brutal incidents a month ago in Kabul city. The lack of security is an important part of the country, limit women's participation in social and public life. Although a lot of improvement has been made in this regard, but we need to work harder to put more women in different parts of the social services, including security forces. We just have around 2,000 women in public forces. In police forces, the male police officers discriminate and abuse the female police officers with impunity. And the male member of security forces think that they are superior to the female police officers. This is what is the discussion that we do with the Ministry of Interior, that the female police officers or female police should be protected, and of course the people who harass them should be brought to justice and kept accountable. Political participation of women. Women's political participation is much better than any time of our history in Afghanistan. A total of 25% of parliament members are women. Unfortunately, the parliament has reduced women's seat for the provincial council from 25% to 20%, which is a setback for women's public participation. However, this does show that we still face with very conservative group of men in the parliament. A clear example of was the famous Shia personal status law, which was clearly against the human rights of women. Also, the negative reaction of the conservative member of the parliament to elimination of violence against women law in the country, which was enforced by the presidential decree in 2009. Law last year, another example of the challenges faced by the Afghan women. Women's rights and gender equality is a political issue. The women should have strong political position to change the environment and make space for themselves. Most of the time, tradition, culture, and religion are used as an excuse to control women's freedom and human rights. What should be done? The security should be improved. This can be supported by the building confidence between the government and public through good governance, in addition to building the Afghan security forces. 2, the establishment of parallel security forces like tribal militia or local defense initiative should be avoided because the Afghan people still suffers from violation of human rights by former President Dr. Najib's militia. Unfortunately, the international community were interested to establish parallel system of militia. At the beginning, they were calling auxiliary police, and then we fought, and then they said the local militias, we fought, and they changed finally the name to Afghan Local Police. And this Afghan Local Police is almost 33,000 in some part of the country. Until 2017, there's a money for it, there's a budget for it, but there is no proper plan or strategy what to be done after 2017 with them. And they're the one who really violate human rights and commit a lot of sexual violence within different parts of the country. Women's full participation should be the main component of the reintegration and reconciliation program. Accountability, justice, and human rights should not be undermined for short-term political gain. As I said, unfortunately, our history shows that we deal and try to find a short-term political gain rather than building a proper, sustainable peace with justice and accountability, and at least acknowledge the suffering of the people. So I think this continued the culture of impunity, continuation of the culture of impunity, gives more reason to some of the warlords to really exercise what they did in the past and continue to do it. A strong focus should be put on the empowerment of women through education in different levels, not only in primary level, because in primary level, yes, we do have a lot of girls on primary level, but then when they reach to the age of puberty, because of lack of facilities, because of lack of even toilets for the girls, and lack of female teachers, the dropout of the girls from the school is really high. And that does not help and build their capacity to participate in the future decision-making of the country. Through education and building self-confidence, the women can stand for their rights. Education will help them to have better health and better economy. It will enable them to make decisions about the number of the children they want to have. When they have fewer children, then they can, of course, have time for political participation in social activities. The Afghan woman existence should be recognized in the country as a half of the population. And sometimes, the decisions are made between the different male group and male member of the society because they are the one who hold the power. And they do not even acknowledge the existence of women. I think it's really important to acknowledge the existence of women and then include them in the decision making and then of course support them. Yes, we had a Ministry of Women's Affairs and then there's very limited support for the Ministry of Women's Affairs because it's a women's affair. There's a strong need to push for good governance and to end the culture of impunity. The impunity from punishment undermine and reduce the people's trust on the government. And the people has to adopt a survival policy because during the day the government is there, and then in the evening the government is not there, and Taliban comes and of course take the people hostage. Education is a tool to change the mentality of the people and the society. We need to focus more on the education, and of course the quality of education is needed. I mean, we do have a lot of children goes to school, and now it's a lot of private universities and also public universities, but the quality of education is not enough to fulfill the requirement and the need of Afghanistan in this century. We all know that development cannot happen without security, and security cannot achieve without respect for human rights. And both cannot achieve without women's full participation. This principle should not be negotiated with anyone. Finally, the war in Afghanistan is not only the case to protect the people of Afghanistan, it is a war against human dignity, and it should be fought jointly. We should remember that ending conflict cannot be achieved only with military action. It does require a long-term and multi-dimensional political strategy. On the global level, most of the issues mentioned about the situation in Afghanistan are true in most of the underdeveloped and conflict countries. Unfortunately, we see a lot of conflicts in our region, in South Asia or North Africa. And this is, I think this is a trend that we should look at seriously, and we should learn the lessons from Afghanistan and apply it to the new conflicts that arise in our region. Women's rights is a political issue, so we should not really negotiate, and it requires a strong political will. And nothing will be achieved without full participation of all the population. Again, I insist on education and quality of education, of course, and to give tools to the people to stand and change the mentality of the conservative societies such as Afghanistan. Again, I think the word recognition, inclusion, and support is key for women, to recognize the women's existence, to include them on the different decision regarding the future of the country, and also to support them. Sometimes we get a position and then we don't get enough support, and then naturally it goes to be a failure, and then the people would say, okay, women are not capable to work. Because in our case, I don't know in the other part of the world, but most probably it's common everywhere. When a woman cannot work, cannot be as successful, they say, women cannot work. They don't mention name of Seema is not capable to do. But if men doesn't fulfill their job and not capable to do a good work in their respected institution, they would just name that person. That man cannot really be qualified or cannot work or cannot be successful. But for women, if it's a woman, then they call all the women cannot really be successful and cannot be capable. So I think this is a problem, at least in countries like Afghanistan, most probably in the other part of the world. So we need really to stand up for human dignity and human rights values. And this is really a key message that we should send to all of us, and particularly to the young who are the owner of this planet. And thank you very much. Yes.
Professor Türk, may I ask you? May I invite now also Professor Türk to join the panel here? The idea is that the three of us discuss a little bit the topics, all the topics, the relevant topics that Dr. Samar has pointed out to us. I think there were quite a few important messages which you have highlighted. And so now I would first give the floor to Professor Türk, who, by the way, will have to leave us in 20 minutes, but I think we can still use your time well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this remarkable lecture and to meet Dr. Seema Samar again. And I have to start with an apology. I came late and I will leave early. That is because today is a special day. There are conferences like, Ljubljana has become the center of the world, it seems. There was a conference in Brdo. There will be a dinner with the Italian president later on in the evening. So much has been happening. Now, there is I have also something good to tell you. I have come with two gentlemen who were participating in the conference at Brdo on questions relating to responsibility to protect, security issues, human rights issues, and so forth. Mr. Andras Vamos Goldman, who is one of the key persons in international justice and assistance in building personnel for international justice operations, and Mr. William Pace, who is a key person in the global NGO movement relating to the United Nations, human rights, and UN reforms. So they are both here. They heard the lecture, and I'm sure that in the continuation. They may have something to say, but of course this is not an obligation imposed on them. This is just an opportunity offered. Now I would like to say a few words, and again I apologize because I will have to leave in about 20 minutes. What I would like to say is the following. When the constitutional lawyer Jirga was meeting in early 2002, there was a great deal of doubt whether the process will result in a political agreement, in a framework which will be solid enough and complete enough and modern enough to guide Afghanistan towards the future. And that skepticism was there. And I remember Lakhdar Brahimi, who was the UN envoy on Afghanistan, participating in that process, came to New York and briefed the Security Council, and he said, "Gentlemen, you know, I could tell you a great deal about constitutional norms that were discussed, but just to give you the sense of credibility of the process, Dr. Sima Samar is seen as one of the key persons for the future governmental structure. And that shows that there was sufficient openness, sensitivity, and wisdom involved in the process so far, and that the role of women is going definitely to be improved." Now, of course, in the conditions of Afghanistan, this is an enormous task, but Dr. Sima Samar was the guarantee of credibility of that process that started almost 15 years ago, 14 years ago or so. I wanted to say that very, very strongly because that was how the world, how the political observers and commentators looked at the process that was now described by Dr. Samar in her lecture, which covered all areas of development and explained the interplay between political and security requirements on the one hand, and then economic, social development, education on the other hand. And there is one thing that I would like to point out in terms of substance, and that is education. And of course, it is not by coincidence that education was all over the place in the lecture. It was mentioned so many times. And I believe that there are two fundamental reasons for that. First is this. Women in general have been able to take advantage of educational opportunities everywhere in the world. And we have seen this, that when you offer the educational opportunities, women use them very well, and that changes society over time. Of course, this sort of thing is easier to do in a Central European context like Slovenia, where we have gone through the same process, but probably with less difficulty and more quickly. But the essence of the process was the same. And then the other aspect is this. When we look at places where the levels of development are very uneven, and there are parts of countries which are very underdeveloped and require a great deal of assistance. And when we talk about education in such circumstances, we usually take a rather reductionist view, we meaning people from the European Union or from donor communities and so forth. You see, it's far from enough to speak about primary education only, and that point came out also very clearly in the lecture. What the program has to aim at is first good quality of education. It's not enough to have just education, but it has to be of good quality, and it has to be at all levels. The aim should really, from the very start, the aim should be really high, because having a population with primary education without the opportunity to continue with higher education is simply not going to respond to the development needs of the country. And we have seen this in many parts of the world where education has been at the center of international effort. We have seen how difficult this is to make, how difficult it is to produce an outcome in this regard. We live in a globalized world, and it is very likely that the best students are going to look for educational opportunities outside their own country, that it will be difficult to get best professors back into their countries to guarantee the necessary quality of education and so forth. So this is a task of formidable proportions. And I would like to say that in the lecture that we have heard the kind of concentration of experience and wisdom which has been confirmed time and again in various circumstances with varying levels of difficulty of implementation. This is where we are. And of course, women represent at least half of a society, so without bringing their situation to a better level, to improve their human condition in general, the society as a whole is not going to be successful. And that, of course, this is axiomatic. I don't have to elaborate on that. This comes as an axiomatic thing. And I think that education describes the nature of the tasks very well. Now, these are my basic comments I wanted to make. If you want me to make any further comment, I'll be happy to do so, but I'm not really, I'm not here, and I say this with great humility, to in any way monopolize or whatever, spoil the atmosphere created by the excellent lecture of Dr. Sima Samar.
Like to respond to it? Well, I think one of the issues that I would like to mention that, yes, still the condition in Afghanistan is quite difficult, but by no means what is only reflected in media is the truth, the life, the reality every day in the country. Because, I mean, yes, we do have warlords, we do have these militias who violate the human rights. We do not have the full enforcement of law all over the country, but there are people who really want the change. And that is, if you see the images of the first round election in 2014, in some part of the country where it was snowing and it was really maybe 40 centimeters of snow, an elderly lady who never voted in her life is walking in the snow in order to vote. Maybe that will be the last, or the first or the last time that she comes and votes. 85-year-old. And she wants to vote because although most probably her son or her brother or her husband, if he's alive, they told her to vote to whom. But at least the desire that she wants to go and vote and participate and to make a decision for the future of this country is a really positive sign. So everything is not black in Afghanistan and everything is not white in Afghanistan, unfortunately. And what is really important, and I keep saying that, we should really acknowledge the problem which exists in our region, in our country. Because if we deny the problem, if we try to show and paint a very colorful situation in Afghanistan, we just undermine the problem. And it will pop up one day in different ways and different matter. One of the issues that we really suffer is the illegal economy or war economy in Afghanistan. The producer, the smugglers, and the mafia of opium is one of the biggest challenge in the country and one of the cause of insecurity. It's not all the, I would say, Taliban. Of course, Taliban benefit from the war economy, from the illegal economy, because they get a good amount of money from drug economy. But it is other people who are involved for their financial profit, and that they cause insecurity in order to be able to produce opium, to smuggle opium, and to benefit financially. And unfortunately, there's a demand for opium in the world. And I think the whole region, our neighboring countries, somehow are involved on promotion of that, because that goes I don't know where. And which war, I would say, will be funded by the opium produced in Afghanistan. Not only the war in Afghanistan, of course, but the war in the region might be funded by the opium business. So that is, I think, I would say immoral business I don't know what to say. It's a criminal business. It's just against the human dignity. So that is something that we all have to talk about it, and we all have to look at the issues, because it might reach your country. It might reach your, of course it reach here, because it reach everywhere almost. And we are still the biggest producer of opium. There have been different strategy for reduction of opium in Afghanistan. But it is, so far it's not effective, because corruption is involved, and the policy was not according to the need in the environment. It was maybe copied from another country. So we have to look at the practicality of any policies in Afghanistan and also in the region.
This brought another topic into that, a big one, yes, because practically any fragile state that you take and look at, you find a similar story. There's always some criminal undertaking, somebody profiting from insecurity situation, and somebody through this profit perpetuating the situation. In a way, it's very, it's this vicious circle that you really don't see how to break out from. And we have this similar in Sudan situation, we have in Congo, it's a number of places in the world that we can run into this. So I hope we have some light at the end of the tunnel to stop this criminal activity, but this seems to be usually sort of put underground. It's not all that out in the open. But one of the shocking facts, to come back to what you were saying about Afghanistan, and I think this is something for our students that they can't really quite, it would be interesting to grab the fact that you said that 50% of Afghan girls are married before the age of 16. I would imagine by the age of my students, all of them should be married.
Absolutely.
So, 3, 4 children? Now, this is something for you to think about. What would your future be in that? How difficult then it is to pursue the education. So every girl who manages to get through not just elementary school but any further is in a way a hero by herself.
Absolutely. And I think as soon as they reach grade 7 and 8, then they began to resist, of course, against this forced marriage or child marriages. That's why some conservative society or conservative people within the rural area are against the girls' education, because they give them the tool to fight. They give them the tool to struggle and resist against the forced marriages. So I think, again, education is key in order to enable and empower women to stand for their rights.
Put you some more before you do.
No. Well, I don't have anything to add. I see Andres Vamos Goldman, who would want to say something about what we have heard. Do we have a microphone? Maybe you should go to. We have a microphone. So you see, we are fully equipped. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I also wanted to see if I could move the topic a little bit to the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, because there's some interest in, at least I have an interest in understanding more the scope of work of the Human Rights Commission in Afghanistan, your scope of the ability to ask for outside expertise to assist in your work, to what extent you are able to do that from the Human Rights Commission itself, or do you also need to consult and request the government to make the request? What sorts of cases you are able to look at, and what's the portfolio of the cases that you're looking at now? And because I represent an organization that recruits and trains experts around the world and then deploys them to assist institutions and governments to investigate cases of human rights violations and international criminal law violations, whether we could maybe ask you to nominate some experts to some of our training courses from the Human Rights Commission. In fact, I have to tell you, we already have 2 experts from your commission on our roster, but also maybe we could be of assistance in the future. So maybe if you could speak a little bit about the Human Rights Commission, your scope of work, what you're able to ask from the international community, and how we could work together.
Well, thank you very much. I think the Human Rights Commission has a very wide mandate, or we actually create a lot of work for ourselves. Human rights education is one of the topics that one of the sections that we work hard in order to include human rights in curriculum of the school, and the curriculum of police, and the curriculum of judges, and the curriculum of prosecutors, and National Army, and even in the intelligence service. For example, recently we had a meeting with the new Minister of Interior. I said that if we jointly do an assessment of the level of understanding of police officers on human rights, because torture was so common in Afghanistan, and we fought, and there's quite a big reduction on torture, but it exists. And for me and for my colleague and a lot of other people, this is a crime against humanity. So he said yes. So hopefully we will be able to plan for a joint assessment of the level of their understanding, and then produce training material for police in order to reduce torture, and also to give them knowledge about the human rights, to respect human rights generally, and particularly to give a space to the female police within the structure. And then we have the women's rights, again, promotion and protection, including reform of the laws and so on, and then practically protection of women's rights. And then we do some research on a big problems like rape and honor killing. Nobody was talking about it. We did a research on it, and we did a national inquiry on it, and then we released the report. It is on our website in English also. And then we have child rights, again, promotion and protection, because the children was really undermined in our country, and we do have a lot of orphans who really are very vulnerable to abuses, including labor and also sexual abuses. And we, again, promotion and protection, we work on we really pressurized in order to make the juvenile justice functional, and make the criminal law for the juvenile in the country. We observe the correction center of the children. And then we have the rights of the people with disability, again, promotion and protection. We were able to push and lobby for the ratification of the conventions for the people with disability. Of course, it should become a reality. That's the next part of our work. We have monitoring investigation, including a special investigation team for civilian casualties by both sides, because we try to have a database on civilian casualties by both, and then we publish the report. We have 20 basic human rights monitoring, that particularly with IDPs in the country, and also with the returnees, but we do all over the country. And then we publish the socioeconomic and cultural rights report every 2 years in order to see the difference and the improvement. We used to publish the report every year, and then we didn't see a big improvement on the situation. So the monitoring, we do monitor the detention centers, and of course it took a long time to convince the Americans to give us access to those detention centers. Finally, we got access at 2010, after 7 years of fight and discussion. And we do monitor and investigate the complaints if the people bring complaints. We have transitional justice, as you know, that we did quite a good work in transitional justice. We had a national consultation all over in the country, and also with the refugees in Pakistan and Iran, that what do they think about the crimes committed in the past in the country. We came up with a good report, Call for Justice. We launched that report with the presence of the High Commissioner on that time, Louise Arbour, to the President in 2005, January 2005. And then based on that, it is 5 recommendations by the people. Acknowledgement of the suffering of the people, first of all, that nobody acknowledged. They claimed that they did the killing or they did the fight. They have the right to do that. I mean, they claim that they defend, but there's a lot of crimes committed during that war. And the second was a symbolic act in promotion of cultural and religious principles and norms for forgiveness. Of course, it should be acknowledgement in order to be forgiveness. The third was, of course, the documentation of the crimes committed in the past for a history and also a lessons learned. And the fourth was the vetting of the state institution from the people who are accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And didn't function very well, but we tried our best. The fifth was criminal justice. And then based on that, it was a national action plan on transitional justice, which was agreed by the donors in Afghan government in London conference in 2006, January 2006. And then it was delay by the government, because government is full of those people who are somehow accused. So I mean, we did the documentation or mapping of the crimes in the past, but we hold the report because the government is not in a position to protect our staff. Of course, it's an action plan of the government, and we just implement one part of it. We built a small museum in Badakhshan, in one of the mass graves, and then we collected the name of the people in the photos and the remaining of the victims in that mass graves. We did a small, another minaret in another part of the country. You heard that it was 5,000 names last year revealed by the prosecutor in Holland. But it is lack of political will in the country. In my view, it's different, because if we do not really provide justice, the people will not trust the government. And that's why they go to Taliban, because there's no proper fair trial system. They just take revenge and quickly kill or hang someone instead of a proper, and that is lacking within the government. So one of the reasons that the young joined the opposition forces is lack of justice.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to go.
Thank you very, very much. I think one of the possibilities is that if you can train, I can look at the possibilities, what can be done. What is really crucial is that war crimes and crimes against humanity is not something that the President of Afghanistan or the Chief Justice of Afghanistan could forgive and undermine during the so-called peace process. We still, in talking position, we are not really in peace process. But whoever comes in power, they try really to find ways. And I think yet we are not really in the right place. Of course, the current government, they try to discuss with some of the people in Kabul, the mullahs and the civil society and women's group, about peace. Of course, everybody wants peace. But peace should not come in any price, particularly on undermining human rights and injustice. So I think what we can do is we can look what can be done in Afghanistan, because Injustice in Afghanistan is injustice anywhere. Injustice in Afghanistan promote impunity in Iraq and Syria, in Iran, in Pakistan, and other countries, Libya, or let's say in Egypt, all over. So I think to answer to your question would be that let's be in touch and see what can be done in order to promote the provision of justice, particularly on war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I have to say that when we heard about the court in Bangladesh, for example, or in Cambodia, or I just read yesterday in the plane the man who was helping or was guard in the Nazi camp, a 91-year-old, and it's 70 years ago. Itself, it gives hope that the war crimes and crimes against humanity should not go unnoticed and unpunished. I think we see in reality that everybody could not be brought to justice, but if some big fishes would be brought to justice, it would be really helpful for provision of justice everywhere. So let's be in touch and see what can we do together. And that's why I quickly said that we need you in Afghanistan. So we do need you in Afghanistan because we really have problem in our judiciary reform. And again, it goes back to the overall strategy on Afghanistan, that the focus was very much on military part of building police and army rather than reforming the judiciary system and good governance.
Let me now open the floor, and whoever has a question or a comment for Dr. Samar, please. Yeah, there's
Thank you.
Could you also introduce yourself?
Yes, of
so
course.
that we-
It's a pleasure to have you here to listen to you. I'm Mitka Naglic. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, it is on, but you need to probably hold it a little differently.
It's now better? Yeah. I'm Mitka Naglic. I work for Amnesty International here in Slovenia. And yeah, again, it's a pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to listen to you. Amnesty just published a report at the beginning of April focusing on human rights defenders in Afghanistan. And we made a lot of interviews with people, and of course our conclusions were that government and also international community in a way failed these people who are under attack, who are threatened, and who are afraid of their lives. And I guess, and these are people, not just women, there are also men, those that use their their profession or their public position to emphasize rights of women. And I was wondering, you are, I guess, in touch with many of them. How is this, what's the toll of all this, how they are bearing it? And if it is not too personal, have you ever been, under verbal or whatever attack for your work? Because you are also a very known human rights defender. Thank you.
Yes, of course, we work together with Amnesty, or at least we share information, if not really coordinate properly. But the report was released a week before, or 2 weeks
April
before, yes.
7th.
Yeah. It was around 7th of April. I had the discussion. I said instead of putting women human rights defenders, it should be women in public sphere, because if they are a member of the parliament, they're not necessarily human rights defenders. So they are women in public position, or if they are governor or judge or prosecutor. So they are, my own staff in the Human Rights Commission, of course. So we had a little disagreement on the name of the report. But they already printed, and then I said, okay, but in the future, they should be consulting somehow that we should choose a proper name for a report. Yes, of course, as I said, that the women are really under attack on if they have a public position, because they are more vulnerable to be attacked. Like a male governor would have 15, 20 bodyguards, and a female governor hardly have one. We had one female governor, she left also. But hopefully we will have few more female governors. At least they put the name on the list. A male prosecutor will have 15 bodyguards with armored vehicle. A female prosecutor doesn't have that facility, so they are more vulnerable. And the Taliban also attack women to scare them from public positions. Yes, I'm also under attack. They attack me all the time from the Loya Jirga in 2002 onward, and even before. But I think that we need to stand up to show we cannot really leave the space, because if we leave the space, they will feel it with their own mentality. So we have to resist. And I think that it requires a proper mechanism in order to protect. Of course, the government also, we keep pushing. As I said, that we had a meeting with the Minister of Interior, and I said the police women in the Ministry of Interior, in all the structure in the country, should be protected as your daughter. Because, I mean, they should not see them as they're not related to them. With that kind of a commitment, she can really provide protection to the female police, to the female in the army, to the female, and everywhere, and even in the parliament and some other places. It's very simple to harass women, and particularly in countries like Afghanistan.
Can I please
So
just...
they did throw out assets on the faces. They kidnapped. They killed this senator. I mean, who was in the report. Actually, she was traveling, and she was on the way, was kidnapped, and her daughter was killed. Another daughter is paralyzed. But of course, they attacked the men also. But women are not much in the public positions, so they easily identify them. And we lost a lot of police in Helmand and Kandahar, female polices in Helmand and Kandahar in the last year. The Department of Ministry of Women's Affairs in Jalalabad was killed. So there's a lot of vulnerability of women, because we usually don't carry all those gunmen with us.
But why you don't? You know, is it a question of money that a male prosecutor would have an army of bodyguards and a female not? Or
Well, one is our style is different, honestly. Women are different than the men. We are not very interested on Kalashnikovs and guns, and we are not making it also. I said in a public meeting, we had a conference with Amnesty together in Kabul, and I said, war is male business, but peace should be a woman business. So women should be participate in the peace process. So they really try to trick us sometimes. Like they said that we are going to establish a female board for the peace process. And I said, no, we don't want female board, because board will not be included in the table. Board will sit somewhere and make a policy. We want somebody in the table, face to face with them. So that's why I think we don't feel comfortable to have. I mean, I have four men bodyguards with a gun, but I'm tired sometimes from their presence, because I don't have my own privacy. I don't have my own life. They control.
Thank you. You've answered indirectly about 7 of the questions I was going to ask. I think about 1325 about the International Criminal Court and its role in prosecuting and reconciliation. But I guess I had a question that might be difficult in this framework to answer, but it'd be two parts. One is there any way other than serious conflict to get past patriarchy in the societies that are extremely entrenched in patriarchy? Was there any pacifist alternative to this unbelievably difficult struggle that is continuing on in so many societies at the moment? And secondly, I take it from your comments that the EU's conditionalities, they're very strong conditional donor policies on human rights, women's rights, etc., are a positive impact, and that the complaints that you get that this actually feeds anti-Western, that it allows authoritarian forces to say that this inspires that human rights is a Western value and not really a universal value, etc.
Well, I think you just mentioned ICC. Again, luckily Afghanistan ratified ICC in 2003 again, March 2003. So the problem is that we don't refer any cases of the past crimes to them. But from 2003, and it's not enough, let's say, criminal investigation on war crimes and crimes against humanity, but still it can be done, because every day there's a commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan. And also on 1325, we pushed the government. Finally, Finland promised signed a memorandum of understanding with Ministry of Foreign Affairs to work on the action plan in 2011. It was interesting because at that time I said, I hope the action plan, it's already 11 years, and I hope the action plan will not take another 11 years to be made, and the implementation will take another 11 years. It will be 33 years rather than quickly. But the action plan is done, and we saw the draft last week, and hopefully it will be launched by the President and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and be implemented, of course, in the country. On the what I would say. On the yes, it is difficult to say it openly and publicly, but I think we should focus on those issues. We should really try to support the provision of justice and removal of some of the criminals from, at least isolate them from position of power and commission of the same practice that they did. On the EU policy, I think, honestly, I keep saying that it is not really Western values. It's a human value wherever we live. That's why when I began my speech everywhere in the country, I say that, yes, it's a human value. It doesn't require boundaries, doesn't require ethnicity, language, or color, or religion. So I think they should be more stronger in finding a proper approach in order to promote human rights, rather than putting some condition which restrict the donation for improvement of human rights situation in the country. We had a long discussion. It was, the question of death penalty and so on, which was also an issue in our region, not only in our country, but in our region. But I think the the overall approach should be based on human rights everywhere, not be selective in one country and not do it in another country. Because we see that some of the countries are really, really very bad on human rights, but they are still very friendly with the US or with some of the European countries. We know it. So this selectivity is not a good policy by anyone. And secondly, I would say that it is very clear that without empowering women in any society, in particularly in conservative societies like Afghanistan or any other conflict countries where they use the tradition, religion, in order to control women's freedom and activities and human rights, they should have practical policies to reduce that kind of approaches, and that one of them can be, of course, education and possibility for them to give education. Like we keep saying that if there is possibility to give more scholarship for girls, or not even because most of them doesn't come back, so most probably to focus within the country to build an institution that could give a quality education in the country. Like with all the money that came to Afghanistan in the last 14 years, we still don't have a gender training in any of the university. Can you imagine with the billions of dollars, and everybody's talking about gender equality and gender promotion of gender equality in Afghanistan and women's participation. But then we don't have a gender studies program anywhere. And then when we approach, well, all the embassies has money for this. And the UN was responsible. And when I was in 2002, we were talking about gender studies program in Kabul University. It doesn't exist. Gender mainstreaming in the different ministries, they established gender department. They put one woman or two women in that department, and they're not really involved on any policy of the ministry. So a relative of some of the ministers are sitting over there, and she's a director. This is not going to work. So, it's a copy and paste. We don't need copy and paste, we have to write it. A new article. Sorry. I don't know what to say.
The message is quite clear. Yeah. If you formally satisfy the requirements, that's what you do. You designate an office, and now I have done my job. I have the Office for Women Affairs, but you don't involve.
In all the ministries, we have gender department.
I don't see the tweet, but is there a question there? Somebody read it?
Yeah, I can do that. How has economic crisis influenced the human rights development in Afghanistan? From Justice Green.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. How has economic crisis influenced the human rights development in Afghanistan?
Of course, it has a negative impact on human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan, because the reduction, as I said, the reduction of donation and support generally in Afghanistan. If we do not have, for example, the infrastructure, the movement of women are limited. If we do not have enough health facilities, women are more vulnerable. I mean, as I said, that they are pregnant all their life or breastfeeding. They're so vulnerable to different sicknesses. If education facilities are reduced or destroyed, women are vulnerable to that. So I think it has negative impact overall in the country, but particularly on vulnerable groups of people. I don't like to put women as a vulnerable group, but the reality is that we are vulnerable to most of the problems.
Any other questions there? No? I don't think. Oh, yeah, I don't. Can somebody read that comment or question? Maybe, can you read it? Yeah. You have the microphone. I'm asking you if you could just read what's on the screen because we don't see it. No, okay, just.
Here is another one. How important are human rights for Afghanistan foreign policy? So how important?
Well, yes. I think it's really important. At least, we need to show that we are committed to human rights, because EU and some other countries really put conditional to their funding to Afghanistan. So it is there. And I have to say, in the new government, both of the Dr. Ghani and Dr. Abdullah is loudly talking about human rights and women's rights. So we see improvement. We have 4 women in the ministries, and hopefully we will have few female governors. And the president promised that we will have a female judge within the Supreme Court, where we don't have any yet. I mean, there was discussion saying that, well, they're not qualified, and I said the male member of the Supreme Court are not qualified enough either. So put women in order to learn in that position. We are not born qualified. We have to do the work in order to be qualified.
Any questions, comments from the public? Yep.
Hello. Thank you very much for your talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question. I really appreciated the way you tried to explain the complexities, and when you mentioned the fact that the situation in Afghanistan is not all black, but it's also not all white. What are some of your recommendations to get it to be more white or to see more positive changes other than the improvement of education? Could you say there are some, let's say, short-term policies as well? Thank you.
Yes. I think, honestly, if you look at the human rights situation in Afghanistan, we are much better than our neighboring countries, although they're not at war. Because if you look at torture, in our neighboring country, torture is common case, but in Afghanistan, if we find out a torture case, we really make a big noise. And we keep pushing the government to take action and bring that criminal to justice. If you look at the media, we have really quite a free media, and we have 60-something television channel, where during Taliban, 14 years ago, we had no television in the country. Television was not allowed. If they were seeing that the light of the house is on after 10 o'clock, they were jumping on their house. And if they find out that the people watching television or a video, there were no channel of television, but at least they could use the satellite in order to watch BBC or some other Indian soap opera. The man was killed and the television was broken, and he was arrested. This is not the case in the country anymore. We have free media, and we have more than 300 printed media in the country, where we had only one official newspaper during Taliban. So it's 14 years ago. It's not long ago. In this century. So when we really, the mandate that the Human Rights Commission have in the country is exceptional in our region. I mean, our neighboring country, Iran, doesn't have any human rights commission. Pakistan had an NGO, but with limited access and limited mandate. I heard that recently they established, but it's not yet very functional. I mean, the northern neighbor of Afghanistan, let's say Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, you know Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, we are much, much better in those issues. So that's why we are not really completely black. And I mean, you see, for example, a young girl wearing that iron outfit and walking in the street of Kabul where the people are very conservative. Hardly they could do in Pakistan. Of course, the case of Farkhunda was really shocking. But you see in Pakistan, they kill publicly the people accusing of being Christian or had an action against Islam or said something against Islam publicly, and the people not out on the street. I mean, in Farkhunda case, it's first time in our history that women really carried a coffin on their shoulder. And it's not really an easy act with that much violence. Any suicide attack could happen, or any hand grenade can be thrown among the public. I mean, it was outrageous, and the reaction by the people was really good. You don't see that in Pakistan. You don't. I mean, of course, India is different, with that mass rape of that girl. But again, they kill publicly some people, and they don't really go out. So the other things that we, in the past, before the Cold War, of course, the proxy war was fought in Afghanistan, and unfortunately, all these new kind of fundamentalism, extremism became in power in Afghanistan. We didn't have this kind of a fundamentalism in the country when I was young. When I was in the university, we had a lot of cinemas in Kabul. We almost went to every cinemas, at least 10, 12. Currently, girls cannot go to cinema because of the security. It's not because it's conservative. It's of course the media, the television and the internet. You don't need to go to cinema, but still cinema has its own luxury or enjoyment. But it's just because of security, because of the new trend of extremism and different mentality. But thank you very much.
I believe we have exploited Dr. Samar quite enough. I think it was I wish to thank you on behalf of the audience for what you have shared with us today. I think it was a lot of information, a lot of insight in the situation in your country, and maybe to answer a little bit to the last question, I think visits like yours help to put more white to otherwise black picture that the media portrays on Afghanistan. And it's very encouraging to hear that even though situation is complex, things in your eyes are moving forward.
Absolutely.
And that lessons can be taken out of Afghanistan to other fragile countries. And I guess for us, Slovenia as a small donor, and other European countries who are donors, we have heard few things from your lecture today, which I hope we will memorize and build into the cooperation efforts that we try to implement. So thank you very much on behalf of the faculty, on behalf of all in the audience, and a small token of appreciation.
Well, thank you very, very much. If anybody volunteers, please do come to Afghanistan and be interned in the Human Rights Commission, and we try to provide some level of security. Thank you. really a pleasure. Thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope it's useful.